A Second Chance at Love. Previous episodes are available in playlist. A link is given in the video description. Episode 27. The colorful and dazzling fireworks emblazoned the sky. Everyone simultaneously quieted down and looked up at the scenic view of the night sky. At that instant, only the music played by the band echoed on the beach. Seemingly to coordinate with the tranquil ambience, the band members tacitly switched the song they were playing to a more relaxing piece. Benny paused for a few seconds before slowly catching up with the band's rhythm. Holding Archie's hand, Roxanne gazed up at the bursting fireworks in the sky. Then she turned her attention back to Benny, who was playing the drums. A heartfelt grin spread across her face. Beside Roxanne, Estella grasped her father's hand and jumped on the spot, wanting to get a clearer view of the fireworks display. Estella was too short. The horde of onlookers clouded her field of vision when she gazed up. Lucian glanced downward at Estella before slightly bending down his body. Then, he carried her in his arm and placed her on his shoulder. Estella's eyes shone as she appreciated the beauty of the fireworks in the sky. Upon hearing that, Archie finally stretched out his hand in Lucian's direction. With one hand supporting Estella, who was sitting on one side of his shoulder, Lucian leaned sideways slightly and placed Archie on the other side of his shoulder effortlessly. That was the first time Archie had sat in such a high position. A look of pleasant surprise spread across his face as he gazed down and noticed a sea of heads covered in black hair. He looked up again at the night sky when the sound of fireworks exploding rang beside his ears. Meanwhile, Archie was unable to see the fireworks too. A hint of disappointment flashed across his eyes when he saw Estella sitting on Lucian's shoulder. If Daddy had not abandoned Mommy and us, perhaps Benny and I could also sit on his shoulder. Roxanne sensed Archie's dejection. She scanned her surroundings with a troubled look on her face. "Archie, can you not see the fireworks?" Although Archie was crestfallen, he shook his head sensibly. "I can see some of it. It's all right, Mommy." Roxanne was reminded of the anticipatory look on Archie's petite face when he heard about the fireworks display in the afternoon. At the sight of his thoughtful and acquiescent demeanor at that moment, she could not help feeling pangs of heartache and guilt. "If it weren't for my selfish decision, perhaps Archie and Benny would live a more blissful life now." Archie sensed Roxanne's remorse. He grabbed her hand and comforted her. "We'll come here again and watch the fireworks next time. I'm very happy that we can find Benny this time." With that, he curved his lips and beamed at his mother as if to prove that he was truly fine. Roxanne's feelings of guilt intensified. "Come here. I'll carry you." Lucian's deep voice sounded from atop. Archie subconsciously gazed up and met Lucian's eyes, which were brimming with tenderness. Seeing that, Archie hesitated and turned to look at Roxanne to ask for her opinion. Roxanne frowned and scrupled for a few moments before taking a step back to make way for Lucian. "Thank you, Mr. Farwell." She had caused Archie and Benny to be left out from indulging in fatherly affection for so many years. Although they had yet to realize their relationship with Lucian, Roxanne could not bring herself to deprive Archie and Benny of the opportunity to enjoy paternal love anymore. Archie's eyes gleamed when he saw his mother agreeing. Still, he hesitated when he looked at Lucian. Archie knew Roxanne did not fancy Lucian, so he could not shake off the feeling that he was betraying his mother if he allowed Lucian to carry him. "If you don't hurry up, the fireworks display will end soon," Lucian reminded with his brows raised after taking in Archie's ambivalence. Roxanne gave her son a reassuring look. "Let Mr. Farwell lift you so you can see the fireworks." Upon hearing that, Archie finally stretched out his hand in Lucian's direction. With one hand supporting Estella, who was sitting on one side of his shoulder, Lucian leaned sideways slightly and placed Archie on the other side of his shoulder effortlessly. That was the first time Archie had sat in such a high position. A look of pleasant surprise spread across his face as he gazed down and noticed a sea of heads covered in black hair. He looked up again at the night sky when the sound of fireworks exploding rang beside his ears. The brilliant lights of the fireworks seemed exceptionally mesmerizing when viewed from the reflections in the kids' eyes. Roxanne stood carefully beside Lucian while gazing up at the night sky. Nevertheless, she constantly glanced at Archie and Estella from the corner of her eye, fearing they might fall from Lucian's shoulders. Fortunately, both of them were safe until the end of the fireworks show. Archie felt slightly reluctant to get down afterward because that was the first time he had sat on his father's shoulder. However, he did not reveal his emotions. Instead, he submissively allowed Lucian to put him down on the floor and thanked the latter politely. "Thank you, Mr. Farwell." Lucian merely nodded in response without saying a word. The crowd was still immersed in the romantic atmosphere of the fireworks show. Suddenly, the band on stage went silent. Roxanne had been keeping an eye on Benny's whereabouts, so she had instantaneously noticed the changes on the stage and shifted her gaze in that direction. She saw Benny stepping out from behind the drum set and standing in the middle of the stage while holding a microphone. As if to help Benny, the guitarist casually plucked the strings on his guitar to attract everyone's attention to the stage. "Ahem! Everyone, please listen to this little boy. He has a favor to ask from all of you." The lead singer cleared his voice and requested for the audience to hear Benny out. Hearing that, Roxanne and the others could already guess what Benny was about to say. Staring at his solemn expression on stage, Roxanne felt contented and even teared up a little. "Hello, everyone. My name is Benny." The little boy's childish voice magnified and resonated throughout the venue as he spoke into the microphone. Benny did not appear nervous or afraid despite facing the huge crowd. "I came here to watch the fireworks show with my mommy and brother, but I accidentally got lost because there were too many people just now. If anyone sees someone looking for a child, please help me inform my mommy that I'm here. My mommy is very pretty, so it will be easy to identify her." Benny contemplated briefly after saying that. Then, he added, "Perhaps there will be an uncle searching for me too. Everyone can also tell him that I'm here. He's distinguishable too because he is very tall and handsome. There are also 2 children around my age beside them." Roxanne was amused by Benny's description of them. Even Lucian wore a faint smile as he listened to Benny's speech. Perhaps the 4 of them were too eye-catching. Soon, people were turning their heads in Roxanne, Lucian, and the 2 kids' direction. Benny also noticed them, and when he spotted Roxanne, he held the microphone and called out in excitement, "Mommy!" The crowd made way for Roxanne and the others to reach Benny's side. "Mommy!" Benny jogged over happily with the microphone in his hand when he saw Roxanne. She bent down while beaming and pulled Benny into her embrace. You scared me, Benny. Luckily, you're so smart. Benny gently patted his mother's back and said, I'm sorry, Mommy. But don't worry about me because I'm very smart. I will not follow the bad guys. When Benny realized he had gotten lost just now, he had immediately run toward the band, following the music, because he thought he would be safer there. He had planned on borrowing the microphone from the band to find Roxanne. Fortunately, the band members were kind and friendly. After they had been made aware of Benny's situation, they had agreed to his request with alacrity. Benny turned on his heels and sensibly expressed his gratitude to the band members. Thank you all. They responded with a smile. You're welcome. We're glad as long as you are safely reunited with your family. The band members even added a friendly reminder to Roxanne, your son is very gifted in music. If you can afford it, we suggest you send him to a music academy to receive proper lessons. Roxanne grinned in agreement. I'm sorry, Benny, Archie apologized to his brother when the crowd shifted their attention away from them. It was my fault for not holding your hand tightly enough that you got lost in the crowd. Benny gazed at his brother and said casually, it wasn't your fault, Archie, it's too crowded here. Besides, I wasn't lost, and it was fun playing the drums, anyway. Archie frowned for several seconds before nodding slowly. I will hold your hand tightly next time, he promised, and never allow something like this to happen again. Benny nodded vigorously as he squeezed his brother's hand. Estella came over to join the fun. Me too. I'll hold both your hands. The little girl clutched Benny's hand as she spoke. Touched to see the three children walking hand in hand with similarly solemn expressions, Roxanne smiled gratefully. Come, Benny, she said gently. Thank Mr. Farwell. Benny appeared to be surprised by her words. Mr. Farwell was the one who found you, Roxanne said. The boy glanced up at the man before him. As Lucian was standing with his back against the moonlight, Benny could not see his expression at that moment. Nevertheless, the boy obeyed his mother by expressing his gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Farwell. Lucian nodded noncommittally. No problem. You were clever enough to wait here. The boy was taken aback by his father's compliment. He stroked his nose awkwardly. The crowd on the beach thinned out after the fireworks show. Despite Roxanne's reservations, she took the children for a walk at the beach, considering that they might be fearful. The weather was lovely, and the water was placid. As the children wanted to go to the beach, Roxanne let go of their hands and allowed them to run toward the shore while she waited on the side. Accidentally got lost because there were too many people just now. If anyone sees someone looking for a child, please help me inform my mommy that I'm here. My mommy is very pretty, so it will be easy to identify her. Benny contemplated briefly after saying that. Then, he added, perhaps there will be an uncle searching for me too. Everyone can also tell him that I'm here. He's distinguishable too because he is very tall and handsome. There are also two children around my age beside them. Roxanne was amused by Benny's description of them. Even Lucian wore a faint smile as he listened to Benny's speech. Archie, Benny looked at Estella, who was beside him cautiously. Was it really Mr. Farwell who found me? Archie nodded. Mommy was panicking earlier. She was about to take Essie and me to look for you when Mr. Farwell stopped her and went to look on his own. Benny glanced at Lucian, who was standing not far away, with a complicated mix of emotions within him. It was fortunate that Mr. Farwell found you in time. Otherwise, Mommy would have really cried. Archie's heart twinged with guilt when he thought about how anxious Roxanne had been. Because of that, the boy had to thank his father despite not liking him. Benny was full of regret when he learned that Roxanne had been on the verge of tears. Did I not thank Mr. Farwell enough earlier? As he was unaware of the situation, he had only thanked him because his mother had told him to. Looking back on it now, he felt a little guilty. Although he did not like his father, he thought he should thank him properly for doing their mother such a big favor. Archie smiled at his brother, who still looked dejected. Mommy will thank him for you. He glanced toward the two adults. Besides, Mr. Farwell would probably want Mommy to thank him. Deep in thoughts, the two boys gazed at their parents. Estella, on the other hand, was busy amusing herself. Perhaps the four of them were too eye-catching. Soon, people were turning their heads in Roxanne, Lucian, and the two kids' direction. Benny also noticed them, and when he spotted Roxanne, he held the microphone and called out in excitement, "Mommy!" The crowd made way for Roxanne and the others to reach Benny's side. Roxanne did not know what the children were thinking. Seeing that it was getting late, she called out to the children, "Are you done playing? It's getting late, and we should head back. We'll come back tomorrow." The children ran toward them, while Benny ran straight toward Roxanne, who noticed that the child's expression was odd. "What's the matter?" she asked as she leaned over to pull him into her arms. "I'm sorry, Mommy," the boy answered glumly. "I will remember to stay by your side next time and not wander off." Roxanne was confused. They were doing fine when they were out playing earlier. Why is he mentioning this all of a sudden? Roxanne caressed the boy's head lovingly upon noticing his solemn expression. "I know," she said tenderly. "Thank you, darling. I will do a better job protecting you as well. I will protect Benny, too," Archie chirped. Roxanne pulled the two boys in for a hug. Meanwhile, Estella, who was standing forlornly on her own, looked a little crestfallen as she watched the two boys in Roxanne's arms. The scene did not go unnoticed by Lucian. He watched as his daughter stood pitifully at the side, and a strange feeling welled up within him. Although he understood that Roxanne was comforting the boys because she had been shaken by the events earlier, he nevertheless wondered how Roxanne would feel if she knew that Estella was also her child and that she had neglected the girl on more than one occasion. Lucian scowled at the irony of that thought and reached out to Estella. Gazing enviously at the two boys, the girl took her father's hand. "It's getting late," Lucian said in a low voice. "We should head back." His words roused Roxanne from her reverie. She slowly let go of the two boys, stood up, and led them to follow Lucian. Roxanne was about to bring the two boys up upon arriving back at the hotel when she felt a pair of resentful eyes on her back. Frowning, Roxanne glanced behind her and saw Estella hesitantly shuffling after her 3 paces behind. The child stopped in her tracks when she noticed her quarry had turned her head. Her little face was alight with anticipation. Not far away, Lucian pretended not to see them as he busied himself with pouring a glass of water from the bar. Roxanne walked toward the child. "Do you want to sleep with me, Essie?" The child nodded vigorously before asking cautiously, "Is that okay?" Roxanne's heart softened at the child's tentativeness. "Go ask your daddy," she said softly as she gazed at the man in the vicinity. "If he says yes, I'll take you upstairs." The child's eyes brightened. She strode to Lucian's side with her stubby legs, but the man ignored the child's approach. Knowing that her father would agree, Estella tugged the hem of his shirt fearlessly. "Can I sleep with Ms. Jarvis, Daddy?" It was only then that Lucian lowered his gaze to look at his daughter before looking at Roxanne, who was standing nearby. "Okay," he said with a slight frown, "but don't give Ms. Jarvis any trouble." The child nodded obediently before sprinting back to Roxanne with a wide grin. "Daddy said yes." Roxanne returned the smile as she caressed the child's head, then said to Lucian, "I'll take Essie upstairs, then." The man nodded casually. "If she's beginning to feel like a handful, Ms. Jarvis, you can send her back to me any time." Roxanne was taken aback. She wondered why the man was acting so distant all of a sudden. Upon regaining her composure, she said, "Don't worry, Mr. Farwell. Essie will be in good hands." Lucian did not respond further. Instead, he turned to open a bottle of wine and poured himself a glass. Roxanne gazed at the man's back, confused. "We'll be heading up, then. Good night, Mr. Farwell." Lucian grunted in response. Roxanne said nothing as she took the children upstairs. After an entire day's worth of excitement and running on the beach for hours, the children were so sweaty that Roxanne bathed them all. "Ms. Jarvis, will you still be picking the boys up in the future?" asked Estella suddenly during her bath. Roxanne's hands froze. She could almost guess the child's intentions and was, at the moment, at a loss for words. After a long silence, Roxanne answered evasively, "I will go if work permits." Estella pursed her lips and gave Roxanne a piercing gaze as though she could see through the deception. The corners of her eyes drooped sadly. Roxanne's heart ached when she took in the child's disappointed look, but she was determined to stand by her word. Fortunately, Estella said no more throughout the rest of her bath, and Roxanne heaved a sigh of relief. Roxanne was tucking the children in after their baths when Estella spoke. "I want to hear a bedtime story, Ms. Jarvis." Roxanne agreed without hesitation, as she felt guilty. "All right, I'll tell you one. I want to hear the story of Sleeping Beauty." Roxanne was stunned as she instinctively recalled the sudden kiss on the stage at the mention of Sleeping Beauty. "Ms. Jarvis." Jerking out of her reverie, Roxanne forced a smile at Estella before telling her the tale of Sleeping Beauty. The child paid close attention and fell asleep shortly after Roxanne finished. Covering the child with the quilt, Roxanne lay down beside her. Although she felt physically tired after running around an entire day, her mind was still in restless turmoil when she closed her eyes. She couldn't help blaming herself despite having found Benny. Aside from that, Estella's mention of Sleeping Beauty kept reminding her of the kiss during the play, and she couldn't seem to shake it off her mind. Despite lying in bed for an indeterminate amount of time, Roxanne could not fall asleep. Looking at the time and seeing that it was almost midnight, Roxanne promptly got out of bed and went downstairs. If I'm right, there are a few red wine bottles at the bar. Maybe I'll sleep better after having some red wine. Emerging from her room, she frowned slightly when she saw that it was brightly lit downstairs. Lucian is alone downstairs. Could he be awake as well? Roxanne slowed down. She did not want to go down and face the man alone at that hour. As she was debating with herself whether or not to return to her room, Lucian's voice sounded. "Can't sleep, Ms. Jarvis." Roxanne paused in her steps. After a long hesitation, she decided to go down. "How did you know it was me?" Lucian was seated on the couch, dealing with some work. He glanced up upon hearing her words. "I heard the door open, and the kids should be asleep now. You are the only one left." Roxanne nodded in comprehension. "Are you not done with work?" she asked with polite concern. "Yet. What about you? Why can't you sleep?" Roxanne frowned, wondering how she should broach the subject. Aside from losing Benny, the other reason was more difficult for her to discuss. Lucian's voice sounded again before she could speak. "Are you still not over the incident of losing Benny?" The man's eyes remained fixated in her direction. Roxanne hesitated for a moment before nodding in silent admittance. Lucian's eyes grew slightly dim. He had expected it. The woman did not look good when the child had gone missing. He reckoned she would not recover from it that easily. He had also anticipated that the woman might not be able to fall asleep that night. The living room plunged into silence. Roxanne felt awkward. She cleared her throat to speak, but the man's voice sounded again. "It wasn't your fault that Benny went missing. It was my fault for not keeping a closer eye on all of you, as I was by your side," Lucian said in a low voice. "You don't have to blame yourself. Rest assured that something like this will never happen again." His speech surprised Roxanne. He sounded as though they would be living together in the future and that he would help to care for the two boys. Such a thought had only flashed across her mind once. "I'll leave you to your work, Mr. Farwell. I'm just here for a drink. Don't feel the need to entertain me." Roxanne inclined her head at him before turning to head to the bar. The bar was filled with expensive wine, as they were in a presidential suite worthy of the name. Some bottles were even vintage. Roxanne did not know much about wine other than red wine was a sleeping aid. After perusing the selection, she opened a bottle at random. When Lucian heard the sound of a bottle opening, he turned around to glance at Roxanne's back. Although he could not see which bottle she had opened, he reminded her, "Red wine will cause a massive hangover. Don't drink too much." Roxanne grunted nonchalantly in response. The sound of Roxanne pouring herself wine was the only thing audible in the ensuing silence of the suite. Lucian's attention was so focused on her that the contents of his email did not register to him. Roxanne quickly finished a glass of wine, but she did not feel any drowsiness during a pause for a few seconds to reflect upon her sobriety. Exasperated, she poured herself another glass. Before she knew it, she had had 5 drinks. Roxanne was beginning to feel drowsy when she came back to her senses. Dimly aware that she could not drink any more, Roxanne got up to return to her room after tidying up the bar. However, she found her legs giving way when she stood up. She gave a low moan as she staggered to her feet. Roxanne quickly regained her composure and said, "I appreciate your gesture, Mr. Farwell, but there is no need to take all the responsibility upon yourself. I will take better care of my children." Just when she thought she was going to fall, a large hand wrapped around her waist. Lucian's scent wafted into her nose the next second. "I told you to go easy on the red wine." Lucian sounded upset. The woman would have made a fool of herself if he hadn't been paying attention. Roxanne could not bring herself to answer although she had heard him. Upon noticing how warm his embrace was, she snuggled against him. Lucian's eyes flashed when he noticed her movements. His grip around her waist grew tighter. "How are you feeling? Can you walk?" Roxanne nodded and attempted to take a step forward, but she could not muster up the energy. Her legs felt like jelly, and she almost fell out of Lucian's arms merely from lifting a foot. Frowning at the state of her intoxication, Lucian swept her into his arms. Roxanne felt herself being swept off her feet before she could process what was going on. "I can manage." Lucian gazed down at her. "Let me send you back." "Quiet. Don't wake Essie up." "Essie." Only then did Roxanne remember the little girl, her roommate for the night. She obediently fell silent at Lucian's words. With the woman in his arms, Lucian took 2 steps forward before sensing she had turned and was leaning her head on his shoulder. He looked down and saw that she was already unconscious. Her cheeks were still flushed because of the alcohol. Lucian's heart softened, and he slowed down. "Benny," Roxanne muttered in her sleep as they were ascending the stairs. She sounded distraught. Lucian felt something pricking his heart. He knew that she must be dreaming about losing the boy. Lucian carried Roxanne all the way to the room. Once he entered, his eyes darkened when he saw that Estella had rolled over to the edge of the big bed and was still sleeping soundly. That was not how she was at home. She would sleep in the same position through the night, almost without moving an inch. Is she moving so much because she's in a new environment? Or is it because she feels more at home around Roxanne? Holding that thought, Lucian gently put Roxanne down before walking over to the other side to carry Estella to the middle of the bed. "Daddy," Estella muttered, half awake, thinking she was dreaming. Lucian caressed her cheek as he watched her go back to sleep. When she was quiet again, Lucian glanced over at Roxanne and went to pour her a glass of water. Feeling someone pulling her up, Roxanne opened her eyes in a daze, only to see Lucian staring at her with a frown. "Drink some water. It'll help with the hangover." His voice rang out lowly beside her ear. At that moment, Roxanne felt everything was so surreal. "Am I dreaming? What hangover? Did I drink?" "Lucian," she called out hesitantly. "Yes. It's really him." Roxanne narrowed her eyes, and a pitiful look slowly crept over her face. Lucian frowned at the change in her expression. To his surprise, Roxanne suddenly leaned into his embrace and even rubbed her face against his chest endearingly. Although he knew that the ordeal had scarred Roxanne, the true extent of it was a revelation to him. Lucian's arm tensed when the muttering became incessant. "Benny is back," he assured her softly. "He's fine now." Lucian froze where he was with his gaze locked on the woman in his arms. He did not dare to move a muscle. He had never once expected her to behave so intimately toward him ever since they met one another again. Although he was fully aware that he should keep a distance because she was only acting like that because she was drunk, he still wanted to keep her close. In fact, if it were not for the fear of disturbing her sleep, he would have hugged her tighter. This is ridiculous. Lucian could not believe he just caught himself wanting more. Over the years, he had never treated anyone that way, not until he met Roxanne. Lucian, the woman mumbled sadly in her sleep beside his ear. His arms tensed up when her voice called him back to reality. He wanted to tell her that he was right beside her. Feeling his embrace, Roxanne looked up at him in a stupor and murmured, "Why are you so cruel? Am I still not good enough for you? Love you so much, but you've never liked me the slightest bit." Her words pierced his heart like a knife over and over again. It pained him beyond words when he thought of what she had said, but that was not the end of her questioning. "Why? What else should I do to make you love me? Tell me. I'll change. Why are you so quiet?" Roxanne reached for his face frantically when she did not get a response. "Come on. What should I do to make you love me?" A frown surfaced on Lucian's remorse-stricken face as he grabbed her hands. "You're drunk, Roxanne." When she heard him calling her name, a satisfied smile broke out on her face. Lucian's heart wrenched again the moment he saw her smile. He would rather she looked at him indifferently, as she always did, because her affection only reminded him of how things had been between them 6 years ago. Back then, he had been her world, yet he had taken her for granted. He did not appreciate her and had killed her love for him instead when she left in brokenness. In the end, their intimacy reminded him that things had ended up as they were because of him. At that thought, Lucian smiled ruefully and averted his gaze. "Have some water. It'll make you feel better." Roxanne did not respond for a long while. Just as he was about to check on her again, he felt a weight on his chest. "Lucian, the play. Was it really an accident?" she asked, her voice fading away as she fell back asleep. Lucian loosened his arms when he realized she had dozed off. He stated for a while and put the glass of water on the table. He figured Roxanne might end up not sleeping well if he kept waking her up, so he tucked her and Estella in before going out of the room quietly. Back at the bar counter downstairs, Lucian sat down in front of the half-emptied bottle of red wine that Roxanne had opened. I wonder how she felt when she quaffed all this. Lucian recalled the questions she had asked back in the room, and a sense of self-pity rose in his heart. He knew better than anyone else if what had happened during the play was an accident. It was just that he could not control himself when he saw her sleeping deeply. But what bothered him was the fact that he did not have the courage to come clean with her. Lucian could not believe that there were actually things that he did not dare to admit. When Roxanne woke up the next morning, she felt a stabbing pain in her head. She turned her head and saw the glass of water and hangover pills on the table. Then memories of what had happened the night before came flooding back, and her eyes widened like saucers. "I couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs to have some wine, and I ended up drunk. Then he carried me upstairs. I even said some nonsense to him before he left, and he said, 'No, stop. I'm not going there.'" Roxanne wondered if Lucian would be bothered by her action, just as he had been 6 years ago. A self-mocking smile touched her lips when she thought of that. When Estella saw Roxanne sitting beside her in the bed, she snuggled into her embrace and mumbled her name as she woke up. "Ms. Jarvis." "Morning," Roxanne greeted gently, looking at the girl in her arms. "I dreamed that Daddy came yesterday," she said, still not fully awake. Roxanne's body stiffened. "Well, he really came." Roxanne hoped Estella did not hear what she had blurted out to Lucian the night before. Because if Estella did, Roxanne would not know how to face the girl anymore. "What else did you dream about?" Roxanne asked tentatively, trying to elicit more information. Estella frowned and thought hard until she finally shook her head. "One's nothing else? It's weird. It was a super short dream." Roxanne. A silent sigh of relief. Estella remained in Roxanne's arms for a while. When she was finally awake, she pulled herself from Roxanne's embrace and looked up. Estella frowned when she noticed that Roxanne looked pale. "Ms. Jarvis, are you okay? You don't look so good." Roxanne touched her face, surprisedly, wondering what the girl spotted as she had not looked at herself in the mirror since she woke up. She had no idea how bad she looked at that moment. "Oh, I drank a lot yesterday, and I even slept late. There's no way I look refreshed after so little sleep." Before Roxanne could reply, the girl wrinkled her nose and sniffed the air. "Why do I smell alcohol?" Roxanne smiled at her. "I went down to have some wine yesterday because I couldn't sleep. That's probably why I look tired. I'm actually having a slight headache too." Upon hearing this, Stella reached out and touched her for it carefully. The smile on Roxanne's face grew wider when she saw how much the child cared for her. After some time, Estella slowly retracted her hand and glanced at the water and medication on the nightstand. Although she had no idea what those were for, she passed them to Roxanne nonetheless. An inexplicable feeling rose in Roxanne's heart when she saw that glass of water. It reminded her of what she had said to Lucian the night before. Seeing that Roxanne did not take the water from her, Estella held it out closer to her. But the woman pushed it away because she did not feel like having it. Her rejection confused the girl, who then tilted her head. "It's cold. I'd like some warm water. Besides, I don't need that medication anymore," Roxanne said, forcing a smile. Since Roxanne had said so, Estella simply nodded quietly and put the pills back. Then she grabbed the glass carefully and got off the bed to get some warm water for Roxanne. When she returned, Roxanne took the glass from her, had 2 sips, and then brought the girl to wash up in the bathroom. By the time they came out, Archie and Benny were already waiting for them in the room. "Mommy, did you drink yesterday?" the boys asked. They smelled alcohol the moment they entered the room, and the pills on the nightstand confirmed their thought. Roxanne nodded. "I know you didn't mean it. I just need some time to recover from the shock." Roxanne comforted Benny with a smile. The boy gazed at her doubtfully for some time. When he was finally convinced that she meant what she said, he nodded slowly, pursed his lips and gave her a hug. "Let's have breakfast." "It's getting late," Roxanne said, caressing his head. All the children nodded, and the 4 of them went downstairs together. A 5-person breakfast was ready on the table by the time they got down. It seemed that Lucian had taken the food in and laid them out on the dining table. He was scrolling his phone on the couch when they came down. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing a pair of lean and muscular forearms. When Roxanne saw that he was working, she held the children's hands and asked them to walk silently, but the man still noticed them in the end. He looked up at Roxanne and their gazes met. What had happened the previous night instantly came back to Roxanne's mind. She hoped she could find traces of his thoughts on his face, but even after seconds of staring at him, she found no sign of any emotions in his eyes. It was as if his nonchalant gaze was telling her that everything that had happened the night before was but a dream. I know it was real. I saw the glass of water and hangover pills on the table this morning. I can't believe I ended up telling him how I felt 6 years ago. Ever since Roxanne woke up that morning, her mind had been a mess as she tried to guess how Lucian felt about what had gone down the night before. Yet the man's indifference was upsetting. It seemed to show Roxanne that her worry was redundant and that she had been overthinking. There was no point trying to hide it from the boys. I couldn't sleep because of the bed, so I went down to have some. His unconcern made Roxanne feel pathetic, so she withdrew her gaze from him and continued walking down the staircase with the children. "Daddy!" Estella exclaimed the moment she saw Lucian. The man quickly shifted his gaze toward Estella and nodded lightly, putting away his phone and standing up. "Good morning, Mr. Farwell," Benny greeted. Both Roxanne and Lucian were stunned when they heard the boy. Lucian was expecting Roxanne and the two boys to ignore him completely because the children had always disliked him. So when Benny greeted him without Roxanne telling him to do so, Lucian was completely caught off guard. Likewise, Roxanne was also astonished by Benny's abrupt act of affection. Yet on second thought, the adults knew why there was a change in his attitude. The boy must have come to like Lucian after the man found him. It was just that they were not expecting such a radical change overnight. After seconds of silence, Lucian smiled back at the boy, nodding. "Good morning, everyone. Let's have breakfast. The food has been there for a while." The children nodded and hurried toward the dining room. Behind them, Roxanne still felt heavy-hearted and she walked in slowly. Her anxious gaze wandered aimlessly as she tried her best not to make any eye contact with Lucian. When she went past the bar counter, she could not help but sneak a quick glance at the bottle of wine, trying to see how much alcohol she had taken that made her so drunk. "There's less than a third left." "Wait." Roxanne furrowed her brows. "I may be tipsy yesterday, but I can vaguely remember drinking only half of the bottle of wine." "Daddy, you don't look so good too," Estella remarked sitting down beside Lucian. A glance was enough for her to spot the abnormality. Instinctively, Roxanne turned and looked at Lucian, but the man turned away so she could only see his side profile. "I had a late night yesterday. I had a lot of work to finish," he replied casually. The girl frowned and took a deep breath before rubbing her nose. "I smell alcohol too." Lucian was quiet. He put some food on Estella's plate and had no intention of answering her. Luckily, the girl was distracted by the food. She dropped the matter altogether. On the contrary, Roxanne kept chewing on Estelle's words. "I only had half of the wine, but there's only that much left in the bottle today. He must have come back down to drink last night. Here." She took a good look at Lucian. "He really doesn't look well. What was he thinking when he slept?" Mommy, Archie's and Benny's voices stunned a pensive woman. Sit down, they continued. Roxanne quickly recollected her thoughts and went over to sit down beside them with an apologetic smile. How are you feeling, Ms. Jarvis? Lucian asked abruptly. Roxanne froze momentarily and glanced up at him. The children stared at the two as well. They had no idea where Lucian's question came from, but they were left hanging because the man did not continue talking. Lucian fixed his eyes on Roxanne as he waited for an answer. The woman came back to her senses and flashed a confident smile. I had a bit of wine and slept well after that. I woke up with a slight headache, but it's all good now. Thanks for asking, Mr. Farewell. The conversation ended with a nod from the man. Meanwhile, the children were still perplexed. What did they just say? So he knew she was drinking yesterday and they both looked like they didn't sleep well. Something must have happened without us knowing. The kids could not help but feel suspicious about what had happened the night before, but they could not get any more information out of their interaction because the two adults were being secretive. The children pouted in disgruntlement and dug in that morning. Everyone was distracted during the meal. After breakfast, none of the children dared to suggest that they take a trip because they knew the adults did not have a good rest. Roxanne was so absorbed in her thoughts that she did not realize what the children were thinking. As for Lucian, he was used to following Roxanne's plan when it came to the children. After all, he knew that the children liked her better since he had worked. He sat back on the couch after breakfast and buried himself in work. After breakfast, they all sat in the hotel room, each engaged in their own thoughts. Seeing that there was nothing they could do, the children started playing hide and seek. Estella joined in as well. To her, it did not matter where they were. She was fine with anything as long as she was with Archie and Benny. Besides, Lucian and Roxanne were around as well. That was enough for her. The children's boisterous laughter rang out in the room when Archie and Benny caught Estella, despite her trying her best to hide. Ms. Jarvis! The girl cried out, tugging Roxanne's shirt. Yes? What's the matter, Sie? Roxanne asked absent-mindedly. Play with us. The girl looked at her in anticipation. When Roxanne saw how persistent the girl was, she agreed to a game with the children. I'm done, Estella announced when she had found a hiding spot. Even after rounds of the same game with Archie and Benny, the girl still shouted out loud whenever she was done hiding. Roxanne could not help laughing at that. Right after Estella shouted, Roxanne heard Archie's and Benny's soft giggles from another corner. I'm coming! Roxanne exclaimed, shaking her head. Then she walked toward where Archie and Benny were. The boys were still feeling proud of themselves because they thought they had found a seemingly strategic place where no one could find them. But they were proven wrong. They even planned on changing their hiding place to make it more difficult for Roxanne to find them. But just as they were crawling out from where they were, they bumped into the woman. They looked up only to see her smug smile. Mommy, please give us another chance, they mumbled, standing up in front of her. Roxanne quirked her brows and turned them down. Blatantly. No. You guys have to find Estella with me. When they knew they had no other option, the boys did as they were told and tried to recall the direction of where Estella's voice came from earlier. The girl had learned a few tricks from the previous rounds of the game. She would stick her head out occasionally to check the situation outside. When she saw Roxanne and the boys coming over, she wanted to sneak away and go to another place, but it was too late. Archie and Benny had already seen her the moment she got out. "Mommy, we found her!" The boys screamed in excitement as they ran after Estella, who was trying to flee. When Roxanne saw them running, she hurried up to Estella, worried that the girl would fall. Seeing that she was about to get caught, Estella sprinted toward the couch while Archie and Benny pursued her. "Slow down!" Roxanne shouted. Archie and Benny decelerated at their mother's warning, but Estella did not. She continued running toward the couch as if she did not hear Roxanne at all. Because Estella could not stop in time, she tripped over the couch leg and fell forward onto the coffee table. 1.3s Watch out! Roxanne's heart clenched when she saw that she dashed over, hoping to cushion the impact for the girl. Estella was horrified when she realized she could not stop herself from falling. Suddenly, a strong arm appeared and blocked the sharp edge of the coffee table just as Roxanne managed to catch Estella on the forehead. However, because of the strong momentum, Estella still bumped right into the table. Although Lucian and Roxanne managed to prevent the worst from happening, the knock was still painful for Estella. She was stupefied for a few seconds until she finally looked up again. Lucian's palm was covering the edge of the table while Roxanne's hand landed on it. Took Estella a few seconds to get herself together. "I'm fine," she replied softly. Roxanne's hands. Roxanne retracted her hand the moment Estella got up. The warmth on Lucian's skin was still lingering on the back of her hand after the contact. When Roxanne regained her cool, she looked at Lucian's hand hesitantly. Although Estella was not heavy, the impact was still strong given how fast she was running. Even Roxanne found it hard to stop her on her own. On top of that, the edge of the coffee table was sharp. "Is his hand all right?" Roxanne wanted to check if he was injured, but she felt that Lucian was deliberately hiding his hand away, so she could not see anything. After some time, Lucian put down his phone and glanced at the guilty-looking child beside him. "Let's go out and play." Estella's eyes glittered with excitement when she heard that. Then Lucian got up and went over to the entrance to take a tourist map from the shelf. "You guys pick a place." The children took the map and started poring over it. As for Roxanne, she was still thinking about Lucian. "Mr. Farwell, your hand." "It's fine," he answered, looking at her, but Roxanne did not believe him. "Let me have a look," she insisted. Lucian stared at her for a few seconds until he finally budged and showed her his hand. There was a long and narrow cut on the back of his hand. She noticed traces of blood from the cut, and the area around the wound was red and swollen. Roxanne knew this kind of cut was rather painful, but Lucian did not complain at all. When the children noticed what they were doing, they put down the map in their hands and ran over Daddy. Estella was filled with worry and guilt. "We're sorry, Mr. Farwell. We won't fool around with Essie again," Archie and Benny said apologetically. Lucian raised his brows and held out the other hand to rub their heads. "It's just a scratch. Don't worry about it." Then, he gazed at the girl and comforted her. "You don't have to feel bad, Essie. I know you like playing with Archie and Benny. I'm happy you're enjoying yourself." Injuries are unavoidable when you play, so it's not your fault. I just want you to have fun playing with other kids." Despite what he said, Estella still puckered in regret. She knew Lucian was worried about her not being able to socialize with other children because of her condition. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she cried, circling her arms around Lucian's leg. "It's okay, really. Why don't you go over and choose a place for us to visit later?" "Yeah, you should go pick a spot while I treat your daddy's wound," Roxanne chimed in. Although the children were still worried, they listened to the adults in the end. "Thank you, Ms. Jarvis," Lucian said as he looked at her and held out his hand. While Roxanne was bandaging him, she could sense Lucian's gaze on her. However, Roxanne did not know what was on his mind. "I wonder if he's thinking about what happened last night." Roxanne could not help but recall the bottle of red wine that was almost finished the night before, and that made her feel perplexed. As such, the bandaging she did for Lucian was a little rough around the edges. "Are you done?" asked Lucian when he saw that she was not doing anything else. It was only then Roxanne returned to her senses and maintained a calm face. "It's almost done." Lucian took a look at the bandage on his hand, raised his brows, and said, "Ms. Jarvis, it seems that you are very selective when it comes to your medical skill, aren't you?" Roxanne was startled by what he said. She followed his gaze and noticed that her bandaging was indeed horribly done. For a moment, Roxanne could not help but blush. She opened her mouth but did not know what to say. Roxanne smiled at him rigidly, then went to look for the first aid kit. She asked him to sit on the couch while she sat next to him to bandage his wound. Neither of them talked, but a lot went on in Roxanne's mind. From what she observed in Lucian and Estella's interaction, she concluded that Lucian was a careless father. But what he had said to Estella back there made Roxanne feel heartbroken. "He's indeed rather inattentive in some regards, but it's no doubt that he loves Estelle given him a daughter he loves so dearly." Thankfully, all Lucian did was teased her once, and he did not pursue the matter again. "It's about time. Why don't you check with them and see where they will like to go?" Upon hearing that, Roxanne heaved a sigh of relief before getting up and going over to the children. They were still deciding where to go. "Haven't all of you made up your mind yet? Should I offer some suggestions?" asked Roxanne gently. The children were so engrossed in their planning that they did not realize she was next to them until they heard her voice. Immediately, Estella inquired about Lucian's injury. "Ms. Jarvis, how's Daddy?" At the thought of her messy bandaging, Roxanne smiled and assured her, "It's just a minor injury. I have already bandaged it." The children then turned and looked at Lucian with concern. Lucian nodded at them. The children were finally al case and told Roxanne about their conflicts. Estella wanted to go out to the sea and watch the dolphins. However, the boys were worried about the dangers out at the sea after what had happened earlier on. They suggested picking up seashells and making craftwork out of them. The three children could not come to an agreement and chose to discuss other options. Roxanne could not help but hesitate when she heard about their dispute. Logically, what all three children wanted was not contradictory. They could always go out to the sea before coming back to make their craftwork. However, like Archie and Benny, she was also worried about the danger out at the sea. After all, Estella was very important to Lucian, and Roxanne did not want to be held accountable. So, Roxanne turned and looked at Lucian to seek his opinion. Naturally, Lucian heard the children's conversation as well. He met Roxanne's eyes and walked up to them. Rubbing the children's heads, he said, "Since all of you have activities that you want to do, then we shall do all of them." Both Archie and Benny looked at him in doubt. "But, will it be dangerous for Essie to go out to the sea?" Lucian knew that the boys were scared because of what happened just now. "It won't be. All you need to do is sit down on the yacht. Furthermore, I will be there to protect all of you and so will the crew members." The boys looked at him and did not know whether to believe him or not. In truth, they also wanted to go out to the sea. After all, they had never done so in their lives. They only decided to turn it down for the safety of Estella. Since their daddy was all right with it, they agreed too. Once they had decided on their itinerary for that afternoon, Lucian got someone to prepare the yacht before taking Roxanne and the children out. The moment they arrived at the beach, the crew members were ready. Mr. Farwell greeted the crew before they went on to induct them. "The yacht and the crew members are all ready to set off. This is our largest and best yacht. It also comes with 2 diving instructors. If you are interested, you can try your hand at diving. The water around this area is very safe." Lucian nodded coolly in acknowledgement. On the other hand, Roxanne felt a little puzzled. The crew seemed to be very respectful toward Lucian. In fact, the person doing the introduction recognized Lucian at first glance. However, given the status of the Farwell family in Harrington and the fact that it was not the first time Lucian stayed at that resort, Roxanne felt more at ease. The lot of them then followed the crew and boarded the yacht. Roxanne was worried that the children might not sit still. The very next moment, she saw Lucian buckling the seat belts for them. At that instant, the children were stuck to their seats and could not do anything else other than sitting there quietly. 2 of the crew members had their eyes on the 3 children at all times. They were prepared to protect them should anything untoward happen. Roxanne was much more relaxed when she saw that Lucian's preparations had been very thorough. The captain of the yacht chatted with them. "The weather is ideal for a trip out to the sea today." Roxanne glanced at Lucian and saw no response from him, so she acknowledged politely. Seeing that she responded, the crew became more enthusiastic and started to introduce the activities that were available. Before they could arrive at the area for the dolphin sighting, the children's attention was completely captured by the crew's briefing. Excitement was written all over their small faces. In a while, Roxanne would respond as well. "I heard from Mr. Farwell that all of you are out here for the dolphin sighting. To be honest, that is not the most exciting thing to do in this area. I will highly recommend diving since the water in this area is well protected, and the views underwater are beautiful. If you have the chance, you should give it a try," the crew strongly recommended. Roxanne started to get a little interested. All the while, she had always wanted to travel and experience different things. However, with Archie and Benny to care for and her heavy workload, Roxanne had not gotten the chance to do so. Since the opportunity to enjoy the underwater world was made available, Roxanne would not want to miss it. However, the 3 children would be under Lucian's care if she went diving. However, Lucian was still injured. With that thought in mind, Roxanne could not help but hesitate. Lucian seemed to be able to read her mind. If you want to give it a try, just go ahead. It took Roxanne a few seconds before she realized that he was talking to her. The children chimed in too, we will behave ourselves. Mommy, please do whatever you want. Out of nowhere, Estella pulled out a waterproof camera and gave it to her solemnly. Ms. Jarvis, do take some photos and show me. Warmth spread throughout Roxanne when she heard their encouragement, and she nodded at the children. Thank you, darlings. Then, Roxanne glanced at Lucian and continued, I will leave the children to your care, Mr. Farwell. I want to try diving. Lucian agreed indifferently. Soon, Roxanne changed into her diving suit and put on the gears as instructed by the diving instructor. Lucian's gaze darkened a little when he watched the diving instructor guiding Roxanne to leap into the water. For some reason, Lucian felt nervous. Mommy! Ms. Jarvis! The children, too, felt nervous watching the duo jump into the sea. See! Hearing the children's voices, Roxanne smiled and raised her head. She gestured an okay and turned to the instructor, indicating she was ready. Shortly after, both of them held their breaths, and they dived into the sea. From the yacht, all the others could see were bubbles rising from the spot where Roxanne and the instructor vanished. The children exchanged glances with worry written all over their faces. In fact, they were feeling a little regretful about letting Roxanne give it a go. Mr. Farwell, will Mommy be in danger? Benny could not help but look at Lucian. Upon hearing Benny's words, Lucian suppressed his uneasiness and patted the former's head. She won't. He instructors here are incredible. They'll definitely take good care of your mommy. Despite his words, Lucian's eyes were still fixed on the spot where Roxanne dived in. Sensing their uneasiness, the staff on the yacht comforted, nothing will happen. We've had many tourists dive into the sea all these years, and I've never seen anyone getting into any accidents. The children nodded dubiously upon hearing the staff. With that, they continued waiting for Roxanne to return to the surface of the water. At the same time, the diving instructor brought Roxanne further into the water. At first, the instructor grabbed Roxanne's arm tightly all the way for fear of something happening to her. To the instructor's surprise, he realized Roxanne did not seem like a newbie after diving for some distance. On top of that, she was all at ease. Hence, the instructor gradually released her. Slowly, the underwater scenery appeared before Roxanne. When she saw the scenery in front of her, her eyes lit up. There was a vast array of colorful sea coral and fishes. The waters refracted the rays of sunlight and shone down on the treasures of the sea, giving them a mysterious color. Roxanne could not help but reach out her hand. Soon, a tiny fish circled her finger intimately. The instructor was stunned by the interaction, and he quickly took out his camera to take pictures of the scene. In the pictures, Roxanne looked like a beautiful mermaid interacting peacefully with the beautiful creatures of the sea. Meanwhile, the people on the yacht began to worry when Roxanne and the instructor had not returned after a long time. Benny shouted anxiously at the sea, "Mommy!" Estella, too, gripped the railing nervously and glanced at Lucian. "Daddy, why isn't Ms. Jarvis back?" When Lucian heard her question, his gaze darkened, and he comforted her calmly, "She'll be back soon. Don't worry. With that, he took out his phone and glanced at it. Roxanne and the instructor had been underwater for almost 10 minutes. Logically, there was no way the instructor did not know that it had been too long for a newbie. At that thought, Lucian frowned, and a suspicion flashed through his mind. Did they get into an accident underwater? As the thought came to him, the worry on his face grew more intense as he stared at the sea. After an undetermined amount of use, the other two staff began to panic when they did not see Roxanne and the instructor returning. Ms. Jarvis. The children let out sighs of relief as they cast exciting looks at the duo on the surface of the sea. Meanwhile, Roxanne waved happily at the children. Quickly, the staff put down the steps and let them onto the yacht. Though Roxanne enjoyed her time diving, she used up a lot of energy. Hence, it took a lot of strength for her to climb up the steps. The instructor, who was waiting below her, wanted to give her a push to lend her some strength. However, he felt a murderous gaze fixed on himself, causing him to shudder subconsciously. When the instructor looked up, he saw Lucian, who suddenly appeared by the steps. The latter swept his gaze on the instructor before finally fixing it on Roxanne. The instructor's hand froze in the air for a few seconds, and he withdrew it quietly. He had a feeling that he would lose that arm if he actually touched Roxanne. When Roxanne was having difficulty climbing up the steps, she instinctively turned back, wanting to ask the instructor to give her a push. To her dismay, the instructor was casually looking at his surroundings but never casting her a glance. Seeing that, Roxanne had no choice but to retract her gaze. Just as she was about to rely on her own strength, a huge arm appeared before her eyes. Immediately after that, Lucian's low voice rang out. "Take my hand. I'm going down to take a look." Looking worried, one of the diving instructors picked up his diving gear just as he was about to dive into the water. Here were sudden movements on the surface of the water. After some time, Roxanne and the instructor could be seen appearing with smiles on their faces. Upon hearing that, Roxanne looked up mindlessly and met Lucian's eyes, which had an unfathomable gaze. For some reason, Roxanne's heart tensed when their eyes met. The children, on the other hand, were safely buckled to their seats. Hence, they could not go over to help her. All they could do was look over in her direction concernedly. Roxanne hesitated for a moment. Not wanting to make the children wait, she finally grabbed Lucian's hand and slowly climbed up the steps with Lucian's support. The moment she got onto the yacht, she quickly let go of his hand. Her actions clearly showed she was avoiding him. A grim look appeared in Lucian's eyes, but he said nothing. Instead, he stared at her. "Thank you," Roxanne thanked him softly before walking off to get changed. However, her legs gave way as she took her first step. Before she could even react, she started falling forward. Then the children were shocked, and they wanted to crawl out of the safety buckles to help Roxanne. Thankfully, Lucian reached out just in time and grabbed her waist, pulling her into his embrace. Roxanne was still in shock. Thus, she leaned on him to let herself calm down. "It's your first time diving, and you were underwater for quite a long time. It's normal for your legs to not get used to it. You'll be fine after some rest," explained the staff. The children heaved a sigh of relief when they heard that. Lucian, too, looked much relieved, and he gazed at the woman in his embrace with a frown. "Much Ace Town." Roxanne finally came to her senses. It was at that moment when she realized she was leaning in Lucian's embrace, and many people were watching them. Even the children were watching them with their widened eyes. Realizing that, Roxanne frowned and scrambled up, wanting to escape Lucian's embrace. However, Lucian seemed to have sensed her intentions. Roxanne made herself comfortable in the seat, not daring to face the crowd's stare. She kept her eyes lowered and thanked Lucian, who did not respond. Instead, he stared at her silently before returning to the seat in front of them. The diving instructor, who accompanied Roxanne into the water, climbed up the steps skillfully and returned the camera to her. When he was about to help her remove the swimming gear, he subconsciously glanced at Lucian. Worried that the latter might get angry at him for getting too near to Roxanne. Thankfully, Lucian showed no response this time. Only then did the instructor carry on with his task. "Mommy, why did you go down there for so long?" Benny asked worriedly. Looking at Roxanne. Roxanne, who had already removed the diving gears with the help of the instructor, appeared pale. The boys could not help but worry at the sight of their mother's pale face. With a smile on her face, Roxanne comforted, "The scenery down there was really beautiful, so I wanted to stay there a little longer to enjoy it." He wrapped his arms tighter around her waist, informing her, "I'll take you to the side to have a seat." Roxanne frowned, wanting to refuse him in case the children misunderstood things. Unfortunately, Lucian held her tightly, giving her no room to say anything. Just like that, they walked toward the children. Roxanne had no choice but to swallow the words she wanted to say. Upon arriving where the children were, Lucian bent over and helped her to sit down. The children, Lu, quickly reached out to help. "Sorry for making all of you worry." The boys looked doubtful. "But you look sick." The boys even guessed Roxanne had encountered some trouble when she was underwater but did not dare to tell them for fear of making them worry. Roxanne sensed the children were worried. She shot the instructor a helpless glance, hoping he could help her out a little. The instructor understood the meaning of her gaze, but he looked at Lucian when he spoke. "Mrs. Farwell is really talented in diving. Nothing happened when we were underwater. She just wanted to stay there for a little while longer. I only agreed after confirming her condition. She probably looks weak now because she has used up too much energy." Due to Lucian's attitude earlier, the instructor thought Roxanne was Lucian's rumored fiancée. Hence, the instructor addressed her as Mrs. Farwell. As soon as he finished explaining, the children heaved a sigh of relief. After that, they noticed the way the instructor addressed Roxanne, and they turned to look at the two adults in unison. Roxanne looked grimmer, and she frowned, wanting to explain herself. Suddenly, Lucian's voice rang out before she could speak. "Got it. It's not a problem as long as she's fine. You did well." The instructor smiled, totally unaware of what he had done wrong. Having heard Lucian's words, Roxanne frowned deeper, and she turned to face the former. If Lucian had said those words last night, she probably would have said nothing in response. However, after last night's incident, Roxanne could not help but feel insulted by Lucian tacitly accepting the form of address. Lucian, however, met her gaze nonchalantly and breathed, "We're taking the children out to play today." Let's not be too calculative over such trivial matters. I'm sure you don't want the children to be unhappy, right? At first, Roxanne was stunned. After getting some rest, Roxanne finally felt better. She got up to change into some clear clothes. Meanwhile, the yacht had traveled quite a distance. The staff in front of the yacht reminded, "Children, please pay attention. This is where the dolphins often appear. They're really friendly and love interacting with people, especially children. Hence, there's no need to be afraid of them." Upon hearing that, the children nodded obediently, with anticipation written all over their faces. "Mommy!" Archie and Benny called out to Roxanne. She whipped her head around in confusion. "Can you please unbuckle us? W want to play with dolphins," the boys asked cautiously. Estella, too, looked at her with anticipation. Roxanne's heart softened incredibly when she met the children's gazes. However, she hesitated to give an answer when she thought of safety issues. The boys glanced at each other and then at Lucian in front of them. Benny promised sweetly. "We'll be good, and we promise to keep a safe distance. Can we be unbuckled now?" "Daddy," Estella gave her father an imploring look. The children had realized it long ago. Once they were on the sea, Lucian had the final say in everything. Roxanne, on the other hand, never expected the children to change their target so quickly. A strange feeling flooded her heart as she glanced at Lucian as well. To her surprise, Lucian merely raised his brow slightly. There were no signs of concern on his face as he said, "I'll unbuckle all of you as long as you're not afraid." The children nodded vigorously. "We're not. We want to play with dolphins." As soon as they finished their sentence, Lucian got up wordlessly, approached them, and unbuckled the children's safety buckles. The moment the children were granted their freedom, they rushed over to the deck. Lucian walked behind them slowly. Still feeling worried, Roxanne hesitated for a moment before getting to her feet and walking over. The deck was rather narrow, but the two adults wanted to give the children enough space to stand there. Thus, both of them stood quite close to each other. From the back, both of them looked like a couple. On top of that, the children's laughter made them look like a peaceful family. Roxanne wanted to take a step away when she realized the distance between her and Lucian was getting smaller. However, Lucian grabbed her wrist. "What are you doing? Let go!" Roxanne whispered, worried she would frighten the children. Lucian frowned and gazed sternly at her. "Don't move about. It's dangerous." The children stretched their hand to the dolphins. Immediately, a dolphin swam over and gently touched their palms with its mouth. "Wow!" the children exclaimed in surprise, looking at the dolphin with their eyes wide open. A tender look filled Roxanne's eyes as she watched the children interact with the dolphin. At the same time, she had forgotten all about the distance issues she had with Lucian. Lowering her gaze, she pulled out a camera from her bag and took pictures of the children. A seagull flew past in the distance. Suddenly, one of the dolphins edged into the air and gave Estella a kiss on the cheek. Estella was frozen to the spot for some time. When she finally returned to her senses, she touched her slightly wet face and widened her eyes in surprise. "Ms. Jarvis! Daddy!" Estella ran back to Roxanne and Lucian excitedly, wanting to share her experience with them. Roxanne had already taken a picture of the cute interaction earlier. Estella's excited expression made the former's smile widen. I saw it. Looks like little animals really like you, hey. Estella smiled shyly and turned back to play with the dolphins. Archie and Benny, too, witnessed the scene just now and were extremely envious of her. Thus, they did everything they could to let the dolphins kiss them. Staring expectantly at the dolphins, Benny leaned out, causing almost half of his body to hang over the deck. Alas, no dolphins approached him even after waiting for a long time. Rather, the dolphins seemed to be afraid of him and kept their distance from him. Just as he was thinking of other ways to touch the dolphin, someone grabbed his shirt and pulled him back to the original position. It's dangerous. Lucian gave Benny a stern gaze. Seeing it was Lucian, Benny had no choice but to nod sheepishly and apologize, sorry. I won't do it again. With that, he put on a pitiful look while looking at Roxanne. Roxanne, too, was taken aback by Benny's actions. After all, the children were smaller compared to the dolphins. Roxanne feared they might fall into the water if they actually collided with the dolphin. Thankfully, Lucian reached out just in time and pulled Benny backward. Though Benny's gaze had softened Roxanne's heart, she still put on a strict expression. Don't forget what you've promised me earlier. Benny felt even more guilty. He had already given Roxanne a shock of her life by going missing yesterday. And now, he had made her worry again. At that thought, Benny pursed his lips, walked to Roxanne, and carefully tugged at the hem of her top. Sorry, Mommy. I don't want to play anymore. Seeing his dejected looks, Roxanne sighed helplessly and patted his head. I'm not blaming you. It's just that I worry for you, like how you children were worried for me when I was underwater for a long time. Ow, you can swim, but I'm still worried that you might fall into the water. On top of that, the children were still very young. She could not help but worry about them falling into the sea after being touched by the dolphins. She feared they might panic and forget how to swim when that happened. After hearing Roxanne's words, Benny nodded obediently. Okay, Mommy. Roxanne smiled. It's good that you understand. Go along and play. I'll watch you kids from here. However, Benny merely stood there guiltily. He did not move until Roxanne gave him a gentle push on the shoulder. When Benny was out of earshot, Roxanne turned to Lucian and thanked him. Thank you. Lucian merely nodded without saying a word. Ultimately, they were children. Despite what happened earlier, Benny returned to his happy self after playing with the dolphins. Seeing it was almost time, the staff in front reminded, Mr. Farwell, it's time to return. Lucian gave him a brief answer and turned to the children standing on the deck. Come here. It's time to go back. However, the children still continued patting the dolphins' heads, reluctant to leave. Seeing that, Lucian frowned. He had no idea how to get them to come back. Meanwhile, Roxanne was amused to see Lucian's troubled looks. She stepped forward and said gently, We're going back. Let's say goodbye to the dolphins. With that, she held the children's wrist. Only then did the children return to reality and wave at the dolphins reluctantly. We're going back. Goodbye." As if understanding their words, the dolphins leaped into the air one by one. When Archie and Benny were waving at the dolphins, they felt a wet and slippery feeling on their faces. The children were taken aback for a moment, and they stared at the two dolphins that had just returned to the sea in surprise. They had been trying hard to get a kiss from the dolphins. Never did they expect the dolphins to suddenly give them one when they were about to leave. "It looks like the dolphins like both of you too. All right, say goodbye to them. We'll come back to visit them again next time," said Roxanne with a smile. The children nodded, waving enthusiastically. "Goodbye. We'll come back to see all of you again." They kept looking back as they returned to their seats. However, nothing appeared from the waters, as if the dolphins never existed in the first place. The children could not help but feel a little disappointed. Suddenly, they saw some dolphins constantly leaping from the waters on both sides of the yacht as if they were sending them off. Finally, smiles appeared on the children's faces. "These dolphins will still follow us for some distance. You still have time to say your goodbyes to them," said the staff with a smile. The children nodded happily and fixed their gazes on the dolphins swimming beside the yacht. As the yacht traveled further across the sea, the number of dolphins reduced. The children's faces, too, were slowly shrouded with disappointment. They had not transitioned out of their emotions by the time they arrived ashore. Sensing the children's emotions, Roxanne patted their heads and took out her camera to show them the pictures she took just now. "Don't be sad, okay? Look. The dolphins are still with you, aren't they?" The children craned their glimpse at the picture. Seeing it was a picture of them playing with the dolphins, they smiled. At the same time, Lucian's expression relaxed when he saw the pictures on them. "Mommy, we must go back to see them next time." Benny gave Roxanne a serious look. Laughing, Roxanne promised, "Okay. I'll definitely bring you back next time." The boys were not the only ones who liked it there. She, too, loved the view of the sea. After going through the pictures for some time, Roxanne put away the camera and suggested to Lucian, "Let's go back first. Kids need to get changed." The children were drenched from playing with the dolphins. Moreover, the sun was setting, and the sea breeze was a little chilly. Roxanne was worried that the children might catch a cold. Lucian nodded indifferently. Hence, both of them brought the children back to the hotel. The hotel room, Roxanne and Lucian cleaned up the children, helped them to change, and brought them out again. It was already evening. The breeze was slightly chilly, with a faint smell of the sea. It was a comfortable feeling as it blew on their faces. Roxanne brought the children to the beach as she had promised them that morning. It was extremely different compared to how crowded it was yesterday. There were very few people on the beach, and the whole place looked serene. The waves crashed gently against the shore, creating a peaceful scenery. Unable to hold herself, Roxanne removed her shoes and brought the children for a stroll on the beach barefooted, allowing their feet to feel the soft sand. Suddenly, Estella shouted with surprise, "Ah!" Roxanne turned over to look at her, only to find Estella squatting down carefully and picking up a colorful conch from the sand. "Look, Ms. Jarvis!" Estella brought the conch to Roxanne, looking excited. Roxanne pursed her lips and smiled. What a beautiful conch! You can keep this, Essie. You can use it for your arts and crafts next time. Estella, too, looked really happy with her finding. Carefully, she cleaned the conch and studied it curiously for a long time. Though the Farwell family was rich, Estella never traveled far due to her autism. Hence, she had only seen things like that in books. In fact, it was her first time touching a conch. She stroked it lovingly. So, this is a conch. It's so pretty. The smile on Roxanne's face deepened when she saw how much Estella liked the conch. Roxanne took the conch and placed it beside Estella's ear. Estella tilted her head and shot her a puzzled look. Listen. Legend says conches have the sound of the waves. Can you hear it? Roxanne gazed at Estella with a smile. When Estella heard that, her eyes lit up, and she listened attentively. After some time, she nodded vehemently. Yes. I hear it. This time, it was Roxanne who was surprised. Roxanne was only playing with Estella. Never did she expect the kid to give her a definite answer. For a moment, Roxanne could not help but doubt herself. Archie and Benny came over when Estella said she heard the sound of waves in the conch. We want to listen to it, too. Still feeling dubious, Roxanne placed the conch at the boys' ears. After some time, Archie and Benny nodded vigorously, their eyes sparkling. Their reactions filled Roxanne with greater suspicion. Unable to fight her curiosity, she placed the conch beside her ear and held her breath. However, there was no sound. All she heard was the gentle breeze. Frowning slightly, she then looked at the children, who made it look like a big deal. Estella's persistence made Roxanne eyelash loosen an awkward smile. She then stretched out her, wanting to hand him the conch. To her surprise, Lucian grabbed her wrist and brought the conch to his car. Roxanne's hand was so close to his face that her palm could touch his face if she moved it a little. Realizing that, Roxanne's face still leaned, and she clenched her teeth as she did everything she could to fix her wrist at certain angle. A long moment passed before he let go of her hand. How was it? Did you hear anything? Estella stared at him expectantly. Lucian tested Roxanne an unfathomable gaze and raised a brow, answering, Yep. I heard it. Estella squealed with excitement when her father confirmed it. Roxanne noticed him glancing at her earlier, and she felt as if an electric current ran through her veins. Lucian walked up behind them. Seeing her expression, he asked in puzzlement, What's up? After hesitating for a few seconds, Roxanne was about to dismiss the matter by saying she was fine, but Estella's voice rang out before Roxanne's. Daddy! A conch! Estella grabbed Roxanne's wrist and leaped with all her might, wanting to let Lucian listen to it. Lucian frowned. A conch? What about it? Estella said seriously, There's a sound in it. As soon as he heard that, Lucian turned to glance at Roxanne. He figured Roxanne had said something to them. Daddy, listen. Estella was persistent in making Lucian listen to it. After all, Archie, Benny, and Roxanne had listened to it. Lucian was the only one left. After taking a few seconds to recollect herself, she smiled at the children as if nothing had happened. All right. Let's go find some more, or else they'll be taken by the boys. Taking the conch from Roxanne, Estella nodded, held the former's hand, and walked forward. Meanwhile, after having heard the sound in the conch, Archie and Benny dashed off eagerly to find their own conch. Roxanne took Estella's hand while walking behind the boys, occasionally glancing at them to make sure that they were safe. Suddenly, the boys halted in their tracks and squatted, their eyes seemed to be fixed on something fouling curious. Roxanne hurried over with Estella. "Mommy, look!" The boys pointed at the tiny crab on the beach. A crab as big as a thumb came into her view, and it was timidly crawling into a milky white conch as if shocked by the presence of humans. The crab covered its eyes with its pincers and continued crawling into the conch. "How can we make it come out?" Benny eyed the conch with frustration. It had not been easy for them to find one. And now, there was a crab in it, which prevented them from taking the conch. Roxanne shook her head at the boys. "This is a hermit crab. The conch is its home, let's not disturb it and look for another one." When they heard her say that, the boys stared at the conchie curiously for another long period of time. They even tapped in gently, saying with a sweet voice, "I lay, little herniate crab. Let's play together." Their actions shocked the hermit crab, causing its little body to quickly come out of the conch and flee from them. Seeing the creature leave, the children looked at Roxanne guiltily. They just wanted to play with it, but they never expected the hermit crab to be so frightened. It was getting dark by the beach, yet the crowd was getting larger and larger. Roxanne's anxiousness flared as she recalled the incident the night before. Even though it had passed, she was still worried when she saw the large crowd. She hurriedly rounded up the kids and left the beach. Coincidentally, it was dinner time. Lucian took them straight to a nearby restaurant. The kids' pockets were full of seashells. They emptied their pockets and set all the shells on the table before launching into a debate over who owned the best-looking shell. Roxanne's eyes softened and laced with amusement as she watched the kids hard selling the shells in their possession. After a moment, a waiter came to their table with their food. Seeing that, the kids unwillingly kept all their shells. Both kids and adults were starved after spending the entire afternoon at the beach, so they were silent as they dug into their meals. After dinner, Roxanne and Lucian took the kids to a craft workshop. Roxanne smiled and consoled, "Let's go. Maybe it'll come back when we're gone." Hearing that, the children nodded and walked forward. At the same time, they kept turning around to see if the hermit crab would return. Alas, there was no sign of the hermit crab, even when they had lost sight of the conch. The children were upset for a while, but they were quickly distracted by something else. As Roxanne walked with the children, she occasionally squatted to pick up a few seashells. She wanted to use them to make a necklace for Estella. Meanwhile, Lucian followed behind them at a moderate distance. A rare, warm gaze poured out from his eyes as he watched them from behind. The workshop had a variety of tools and materials to provide their customers with the opportunity to explore their creativity and skills. Roxanne and the kids sat in a row as they started working on their pieces. Meanwhile, Lucian sat on the side, waiting for them to finish. He would occasionally help the kids with the polishing or sanding but left the rest to the kids. Estella stared intently at the first shell she picked up with a frown as though she was waiting for an idea to pop up in her mind. She wanted to gift the shell to Roxanne but didn't know what she should make. After contemplating it for a long while, Estella carefully tugged on Lucian's sleeve and yanked him to her station. Lucian cast the little girl a confused look. "Daddy!" Estella shot him a pleading look. "I want to give this to Ms. Jarvis as a present, but I don't know what to make." Lucian's brow arched at the request. "I never thought she would want to give a present, but doing ha-micr-iffies wasn't my forte." Creases formed on Bus' forehead when he couldn't come up with an idea. "I'm sure she'll like anything you make." His answer was no help to Estella. She gave Lucian a disappointing look and returned to her scat with her brows furrowed. Roxanne went up to Estella looking all concerned when she saw Estella scrunching her brows. "What's wrong, Essie? Do you need help? I can help you." Estella stared at Roxanne for a few seconds before she ricocheted for her shell and showed it to Roxanne. "What should I do with this, Ms. Jarvis?" she asked, feigning as though it wasn't a present for her. Roxanne looked at the shell in Estella's hand and was troubled when she couldn't come up with an immediate answer to her question. After mulling over it briefly, she suggested, "You can make it into a keychain. It's simple. All you have to do is punch a hole at the end." Estella's eyes brightened at the suggestion. She obediently nodded her head. "Thank you, Ms. Jarvis." Roxanne smiled and returned to her station to finish her craft. Lucian was surprised when he saw Roxanne had a shell on her desk too. He didn't notice when she picked it up from the beach. He watched as she reached for two thin wires and carefully glued the shell onto them. Despite her busy hands, she would occasionally slide her gaze to the side to check on Estella. An overwhelming mix of emotions stirred within Lucian when he saw what she was making. These two are oblivious to each other's identities, but they think alike. He turned his gaze to Arkik and Benny. After studying them for a while, he had no clue what the boys were making. He watched as they swiped across the tablet the workshop provided for one moment, then carefully polished their shells the next. Lucian observed them for a little longer but still had no idea what they were making, so he retracted his gaze from them. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.